So I made a fairly popular video on Stoicism many years ago in which I outlined some of its strengths. Today I would like to explore some of its weaknesses. So I tell students every philosophy has its strengths as well as its weaknesses, and it's important to explore both. You could think of each philosophy as a tool, like a hammer. A hammer is very useful, but not everything is a nail. So here are some quotes to help you see the weaknesses. The first two are from Epictetus. Is your child dead? No, it is only returned. If you wish for them to live forever, you are stupid. Do not shed tears if you break a cup, for what you really love is cups in general. If you wish your children and your wife and your friends to live forever, you are stupid, for you wish to be in control of things which you cannot. Seneca wrote, "What need is there to mourn for part of life, when the whole of it calls for tears?" Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Whatever is agreeable to you is to me, O universe." So these quotes reveal a problem with Stoicism. The problem is Stoics give you poor advice for dealing with the death of loved ones and for facing death in general. While it's good to remember that you will die through Stoic techniques like imagining your death and what can go wrong, it's not good to simply accept death as indifferent or good. A child's death may not be in your control, but that doesn't mean you should say, "It is nothing to me," as Epictetus recommended. I cannot devalue the child's life in that way. I cannot deny my human nature. So the Stoics believe that you should not place too high a value on anything that can in any moment be taken away from you. And while there's some wisdom to this, since I shouldn't value too highly my car, my incredible good looks, my house, or my iPhone, this advice is unsound when applied to human beings, since each human being is intrinsically and infinitely valuable. Insulating yourself from the grief that comes with losing a loved one is the dark side of Stoicism. Insulating yourself from the fear of losing a loved one takes detachment too far. The death of a child is a far different matter than the death of a bug or the loss of your bicycle. So Job, good old Job from the Bible, he struggles with death, loss, and grief in a far more honest way than the Stoics. Again, many people simply cannot cope believing that this child is dead, gone forever. I can pretend to accept it, and my prefrontal cortex can rationalize it in various ways and pretend it's nothing to me and offer coping mechanisms, but the deeper parts of my psyche rebel. The Stoics tell us to conform to nature, but I will not conform to such a cruel nature. This attitude sounds immature to those of you listening with your prefrontal cortex, but it's actually the most humane attitude, for it refuses to reduce the value of that child, the infinite value. Wanting your child to live forever is not stupid. It's a recognition of what is ultimately valuable. And most people will rightly refuse to reduce the infinite value of this person to a rational coping mechanism called Stoicism. Now, there's a YouTube channel called Empire of the Mind that has a nice video that argues Stoicism encourages the Stockholm Syndrome because it encourages you to love that which abuses you, to conform to nature, as Marcus Aurelius put it. Marcus Aurelius said, "All things happen aright." But no, there may be a greater plan, but not all that happens is in itself good. The Stoic response is cruel. So I will experience grief over the child's death. The child is not nothing to me. This coping method of Stoicism, so-called peace, is not worth it. So again, it's good to say, my happiness does not depend on you. That can be freeing and open up a new potential for love. But it's quite another thing to say, you are nothing to me, as the Stoics sometimes do. Here's a second criticism that's a bit shorter. The second criticism is based on Aristotle's idea that it's virtuous to be angry at the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose. However, if you read Seneca's on anger, you'll find that he disagrees. Seneca does not believe anger is ever good. It's always vicious. It's always a vice. It prevents you from thinking clearly, and it brings about a loss of control. Now, on this issue, I side more with Aristotle. While, again, you can have too much or too little anger, right? I believe it is virtuous to be angry at injustices like slavery. The Stoics, though, attempt to dissolve anger by lowering your expectations, by, quote, conforming the mind to reality or nature. And so the second criticism is similar to the first. Stoicism insulates you from even righteous emotions, like righteous anger, and so it doesn't lead to the best possible life for you. A third criticism develops these themes a bit more. It arises when you consider PTSD and the Stoic emphasis on self-responsibility and, quote, conforming to nature or reason. Now, I'm all for self-responsibility, and I think we need more of it. But like most things, you can have too much of it. The Stoic never blames the environment. It's always the individual who's at fault. The individual must change their thinking to change their life. But is this correct? Is the soldier suffering from PTSD simply in need of some cognitive therapy or a readjustment of what is in their control? The soldier saw lives lost, and seeing people as cups and loving cups in general instead of specific cups, as Epictetus recommends, it doesn't help him. It may actually harm him and make his problem worse. It's horrible advice from someone who's a little too immersed in their prefrontal cortex. Is the adult who wakes up screaming every night from childhood trauma to blame for having the wrong kind of thoughts? Do they simply need to reframe their thoughts and focus their energies on what's in their control? Do they simply need to conform to nature? No. Reading the Stoic works won't help these types of people. The more sensitive people, too, who are traumatized by, say, the loss of a child. So Stoicism addresses some emotions very well, but there are some emotions that seem to be out of its reach, and some subconscious processes that are out of the reach of Stoicism. I think there is something more profound in many of the religions, like in Job, for example. We come to understand that suffering does not simply lie with how the individual chooses to think or act. And we need counselors who can listen and better diagnose the causes of our suffering that lie in something non-rational, not just rational, right? In the abyss of the unconscious, not just the conscious. In the dark side of nature, not just the bright side. Right? So Stoic strategies can help you create your startup company or train for a marathon, but it doesn't really free people from those flashbacks or screaming episodes. And some Stoic strategies can actually make them worse. So consider, too, this great movie, Apocalypse Now, Joseph Conrad's Apocalypse Now. One of the main characters, Colonel Kurtz, he's played by Marlon Brando. Well, he's seen the horrors that are impossible to describe in words. He says that you have no right to judge him, though you can kill him. And Brando says that horror and fear have a face, and it's your friend. And if horror is not your friend, they're to be feared. Now, this is where Stoicism leads. You have to befriend horror. You have to conform to nature. And that's the problem. You know, in this movie, Kurtz recalls weeping at the horrors and genocides of wars. In one case, he inoculated children for polio in a small village. The village leaders then chopped off the inoculated arms of their children. And so there's this pile of small arms. Now, the colonel wept in grief like a grandmother. But he then realized, this realization struck him like a diamond shot through the middle of his forehead. He realized that this genocide was genius. The soldiers who have the strength to do that, killing without feeling passion or judgment, those are the soldiers that can end this war. It's the judgment that defeats us. And this is where Stoicism ultimately leads when taken too far. It leads to profound insulation and resignation in certain areas. Keep in mind that many Roman soldiers carried Epictetus's Enchiridion in their backpacks. The bottom line is the universe has a dark side and can be indifferent and cruel. Reason, too, has a dark side and can be used to kill as well as heal. Reason is an instrument. It's not a solution to all of your problems. So don't harmonize completely with nature or reason. You know, as the Stoics recommend, the universe is hostile to the goals of a 5-year-old child, say. This child just wants to live. Saying the universe is merely indifferent doesn't do it justice, though. It's not honest. Saying the universe is perfectly ordered and rational doesn't explain the depth of evil in nature and in human nature. And so this is also where the religious criticisms of Stoicism come in. A criticism of the profound resignation to what's called the rational order of nature. But nature is not ordered, unless you think ruthless and fierce competition is a type of order. Only one of the sperm make it to the egg. And many of the noblest and most altruistic of people were cut down by our ancestors seeking power and survival at all costs. Nature in reality does not support the idea of human rights or dignity. It simply selects that which best fits the environment for survival. Human rights begins with a type of love, infinite or intrinsic valuing, seeing the person as infinitely or intrinsically valuable. And that's not a rational thing. So when you make judgments about good and bad, it would be inhumane to say, oh, whatever is agreeable to you, O universe, is to me. Or, oh, whatever is agreeable to you, O natural selection, is to me. And so this resignation criticism of Stoicism arises again. So to conclude, I believe the Stoics give a lot of good advice, but they give poor advice on death, some emotions, and the deeper forms of human suffering. Do not place too much faith in human reason or in philosophies like Stoicism. This philosophy is a hammer, but not everything in nature or human nature is a nail. Don't take a hammer to your heart. In the end, Stoicism is a tool, a very useful tool for survival. But living a meaningful life and losing oneself in love and grief involves more than survival. Thanks.